Having the best equipment doesn't always lead to having the best quality. Sometimes if you have even the greatest of cameras and you don't know how to use it, you lose it. All right, you don't actually lose it. However, you do lose some quality, so I'm here to help you with this video. I constantly get asked in my stream what my camera is, what my settings are, and stuff like that, because people keep complimenting how good it looks and how smooth it is. So I figured I'd make this video to share my secret tips with you guys. I want to personally help you guys look the best you possibly can. Not saying you don't really look amazing, because you do look amazing, but I figured you could use a little bit of help. So what I'm going to be going into this video about is I'm going to talk about the equipment that I use, so the camera and the lens, as well as I'm going to be talking about the settings I use for this camera as well. Also keep in mind that although I am using a Sony camera, this also works for other manufacturers as well. These settings are going to be the same across the board for most manufacturers, so keep that in mind that if you did stumble upon this tutorial, it's not just for Sony cameras, it's going to be for all of them. So let's go ahead and dive into this. First off, what do I use for a camera? Well, I'm personally using the Sony A6100 with the Sigma 16 1.4 lens. Basically, this is mirrorless camera. It is very amazing. I love it. They stopped making the 6100, I believe, but I do believe the Sony ZV-E10 is actually a pretty comparable replacement to this. So if you can't get your hands on this or an older model like the 5000 and the 5100, then the Sony ZV-E10 would be a fantastic pickup as well. Now, this Sigma lens is absolutely amazing. It is a prime lens, which means it does not zoom or anything like that. It is stuck at 16 millimeters, which is going to be equivalent to a 24 in a full frame, and has a 1.4 f-stop. I personally think this is probably one of the best combos to have on Twitch. Anything more than this is probably overkill, so if you have a full frame camera, feel free to use it, but I don't think you're gonna spring for a new one just to upgrade your quality just that much. Again, I've seen this look better than a lot of other people that even have full frame cameras. Thanks to this lens with this low f-stop, it creates that amazing background blur that everybody loves. So now that you know what equipment I'm using, let's go ahead and dive into the settings. All right, so first things first you wanna look at is actually the mode dial, which is gonna be on top of the actual camera. On this mode dial, you want to make sure it's actually on movie mode. The reason why it's on movie mode is because that way it actually produces a good clean image out, and it's the proper aspect ratio as well. And whenever you select movie mode, you want to also make sure for the exposure mode, you want it to be exposed for manual. When you have manual exposure, it means that these settings aren't going to be automatically changing and they won't adjust. So if you're moving around and stuff like that, or if the lighting is changing from day to night, it's not going to be throwing around all your settings and making things look off or looking wonky. Also too, I feel like although these cameras are pretty fantastic, I feel like on auto, they don't really do a great job because of the way that they work. Trust me, just use manual, set it once and forget it. All right, now that we have complete control over our camera, we're gonna wanna make sure our f-stop is set as low as possible. Reason why is because that means that this is opening up the lens and the sensor as wide open as possible, so it lets as much light in. So that means we need less light on us or in the room for it to actually brighten the image, and also less ISO. Talk about that afterwards. So crank that bad boy down as low as you possibly can. On this camera, it's gonna be at 1.4. By doing this on this camera, it is just this little dial right up here to the top right. So make sure it's cranked down to 1.4, which we are, and we are good. Another thing to note is that this actually adds bokeh. So it also is impacted by how close you are to the camera. So for instance, if I take this can and I put it really close to the camera, everything else gets crazily blurry. But if I remove it and it goes focused back on me, everything in the background is still a little bit blurry, but not as bad as it was before. So in this case, size matters. By size, I mean the size of the distance between you and your camera. It does matter for background blur if that's what you're going for, as well as the f-stop. These first few settings are really going to change your brightness of the image. That is the first thing you probably want to set, and then you want to worry about color afterwards. So let's continue with the brightness settings. Also, the first thing we're trying to set for is the actual brightness of the image. We want to make sure that the brightness is set before we even dive into colors. Otherwise, we're going to be changing our settings a bunch of times to try and meet each other where they need to be. So next thing is up is going to be the shutter speed. Now the typical rule of thumb around this is to have your shutter speed twice the amount of your frame rate. So for instance, if I'm actually shooting in 60 frames a second, or for reference, I'm shooting this video in 24 frames a second, my shutter speed on this camera is at 1/50. Now for some reason with streaming, it looks perfectly fine to match the actual frame rate. So I find that doing 1/60 works perfectly fine as long as your camera is set to 60 frames a second. So to set this, at least on this camera, you're going to want to use this dial over here to the right. So that is going to help you adjust. Also notice as it goes up, the shutter is actually closing and opening more often. It's going to get darker. So the lower we get it, the better, but you don't want to have it go below 60 frames a second. Otherwise your motion is not going to be correct. It's going to be jittery and stuff like that. So 1/60 should be absolutely fine. It's what I use and it has no problem with motion. Now, next setting is going to be the ISO. This is basically the artificial brightness that you're going to be changing. So once you have your lights set and these other two set, you're basically going to have to pretty much use ISO to help compensate for whatever light you don't have that is on you. Now I keep my ISO all the way down to 125. I want to try and keep this as low as possible. The more ISO you add into it, yes, the image gets brighter, but as you can kind of tell, it gets kind of blown out. It looks, you know, the colors don't look right. It's not gonna look good if you have too high of an ISO. So generally you wanna try and set this as low as possible. Now keep in mind, all the other settings we did before this are gonna make a huge impact on this number. General rule of thumb, keep it as low as possible. Now at this point, the brightness should be actually set for the camera, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. Now let's go ahead and focus on the colors. There are gonna be a few things that really affect the actual color whenever you're talking about like the actual image that you see. I'm gonna go over those really quick. First things first is there are things called color profiles. Now some people use, whenever they're recording for YouTube, they'll use a flat profile. That's to retain more detail in your actual image because your camera's taking less data to capture the color information. And then you use something called a LUTs, a lookup table, to then tell that camera what that color is actually supposed to be. This is really complicated. If you want to dive more into it and figure it out, feel free. I might actually mess around with LUTs in the future, but for streaming, I honestly just use a standard color profile because I don't really see a need in using LUTs. My camera looks great as it is. And also too, it just really kind of complicates things whenever you start throwing LUTs into the mix. So to keep it simple, use a standard profile. Don't use any other weird one that like mess around with colors. All right, so on the actual camera, hit this function button, the FN, and then you want to go over to where it says creative style and just make sure you're set on standard. Otherwise, if you do vivid or something else, it's going to start introducing different colors. I personally use standard. I've had no problems with it. Next, let's go ahead and set the actual color balance or the Kelvin. That is going to be the temperature of the actual image. So whether you have more of a cool look to it or a warm look to it, this is all going to be thanks to your actual Kelvin. And honestly, this makes a massive difference on colors. So if you set this properly, your colors should look very, very good. If you have it too warm or too cool, you might look like a ghost, or like you need to get outside and touch some grass, or you're gonna look like you probably spent too much time in the tanning bed at your gym or wherever you go tanning. So with this, we're gonna go and hit the function button again, and then go over here where it says white balance. So I have mine set to daylight, which is gonna be equivalent to 5,500 Kelvins. Don't set this to auto because it will change a bunch, but if you change it to shady, it adds more warmth to it and stuff like that. You can also use something called a gray card to set some of the Kelvins as well, but I personally just use daytime balance. Another thing to note about this is that whatever lights you are actually using have temperatures as well. So for instance, I'm using a Godox SL60, which actually has a set balance of 5,500, which is daytime. Now, most lights that are out there now for streamers generally have the ability to go ahead and change those temperatures. For instance, I use the key light for my main light and I bounce it off my wall. I have that set to a certain temperature, so that way whenever it bounces back at me, it looks appropriate and proper based on the color that it's bouncing off of. Again, just to keep it simple, I would recommend setting your color temperature to 5,500 Kelvin, and then you can just adjust things in body in case it's too cool for you, or if you look a bit too blown out, or if you look like you don't really have much of a tan, or your skin looks too pale or whatever, then you can adjust that in camera to kind of compensate for that. And honestly, that's pretty much it. That is all I do for my settings, and that is how I get my stream looking as good as it does. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, or come visit me over on Twitch Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday night, generally at 8 p.m. EST is when I start streaming, and you can ask me questions there. I love being able to help out streamers and help them learn more about technology. Clearly, I love cameras as it is, so I really don't mind helping you out. Also, if you thought this was a great video, then feel free to give it a like to really help me out with the algorithm and stuff like that. Also, hit that subscribe button. It would really mean a lot to me if you do. I do a lot of other review content as well as some other like vlogs and things like that. So if you feel interested in checking that content out, I would really love to welcome you into the sub club. Also, I'm just curious, what would you want me to cover next? I love trying to answer questions and help people out and even just talk about the equipment that I use on my stream. Is there a certain piece of equipment that you guys just don't understand or want more information on? Please let me know in the comment section below. I really love to be able to help you guys out. Thank you again so much. I appreciate it. Hope you have an amazing day, and keep the stream popping. I'm just kidding. I never know what to say for these outros because I don't want to say like happy streaming because that's like a Harris thing, right? And then like, you know, my buddy Jayhawk, his thing is like, peace. So I don't know what to say. I don't know. Go have an amazing day. Go have an amazing stream. Go be amazing. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Go do something awesome. All right, I'm now out. Thank you very much. Have a good one.